You've been playing a role this week that no longer fits, not because anything changed on the outside, but because something on the inside already closed, and the people around you haven't noticed. You've been letting them not notice. Tonight, that becomes unsustainable. At 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the full moon in Libra hits exact opposition to the Sun and Saturn in Aries. Libra is who you are for others. Aries is who you are on your own terms. For the past several days, those two versions coexisted quietly. Tonight they are directly opposed, and the distance between them becomes the only thing in the room. This full moon doesn't offer a middle path, it removes one. What you've been holding together by not fully choosing collapses tonight into one direction or the other. Both options are completely visible right now. That's what makes tonight different from every other moment of the internal conflict you've had recently. The inside shifted first. That's always how it happens. Over the past 7 days, something changed in you. Not dramatically, not in a single moment. A decision that had been circling for weeks stopped circling. A pattern in one of your closest relationships got a name. The ground beneath what you'd been calling acceptable quietly moved, and you kept going through the motions. You answered messages the same way. You showed up in the same conversations. You matched the same expectations. Not because you were hiding anything. You simply hadn't reached the point yet where continuing was harder than stopping. The moment hadn't arrived, so you waited for it. Letting them not notice sounds like passivity. It isn't. Every time this week you softened a response that wanted to be direct, every time you answered with the expected version instead of the real one, every time you stayed inside a pattern that no longer described you, that was a choice, an active one. You are managing the gap between who you've actually become and what they still see. That management takes energy. By tonight, it's costing more than you have. The full moon has been building toward exact opposition all day. That tightness you've been carrying since this morning, the one that isn't quite anxiety and isn't quite exhaustion, that's not mood. That's two incompatible states sharing one body and one schedule. The moon at 12 degrees Libra. The Sun and Saturn at 12 degrees Aries. At 10:11 p.m. they stand in exact opposition, and the gap between who other people are still responding to and who actually made those decisions this week becomes fully, unavoidably visible. Not to them. Not yet. To you. To understand why tonight is different from every other night of internal conflict this year, why it's a threshold and not just another difficult evening, you need to see what the week between March 25th and today actually built, and why it made going back structurally impossible before tonight even arrived. 7 days ago, March 25th, the Sun met Saturn in an exact conjunction in Aries. When two planets align at the same degree, the slower planet's function gets clarified, stripped of ambiguity, brought into sharp focus. Saturn governs what's real, what holds, what survives the removal of wishful thinking. That conjunction on the 25th didn't generate an event you could point to. It did something quieter. It made compromise feel dishonest in a way it hadn't before. A decision that had been sitting in the still considering column quietly moved to a different column. Not because you forced it, because the alignment made the gap between what was real and what you'd been calling acceptable too clear to maintain. That was the first step. March 26th. Venus met Chiron at 25 degrees Aries. Chiron is a point in the chart associated with old relational wounds, the places where you've been hurt and adapted to the hurt instead of healing it. Venus in that same position brought your current relationships into direct contact with those patterns. Not abstractly, specifically. One person, one dynamic. The thing you've been allowing that you already knew you wouldn't allow if you were being honest with yourself. Venus-Chiron didn't give you a wound. It gave a name to one that was already there. That's the second step. March 28th. Saturn formed a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. Saturn's sextile Pluto is described consistently as subtle and constructive, meaning it doesn't produce a dramatic moment, but what it builds is lasting and operates at depth. What it did was take the decision from the 25th and the relational clarity from the 26th and give them structural form. Pluto doesn't return what it takes into its orbit. What moved into its process on the 28th doesn't unmove. March 30th. Venus entered Taurus. This is the step most people underestimate, and it's the most important one for understanding why tonight feels the way it does. Venus in Taurus doesn't accelerate or push. It roots, it stabilizes. Taurus does not negotiate once it knows what it wants. When Venus moved into that sign 2 days ago, the new desires and values that had been forming all week, the ones the Cazimi clarified and Chiron named, stopped being fluid. They settled. They became the position rather than a direction. 2 weeks ago, you could have bent. Not without cost, but the flexibility was there. Today, it isn't. Not because you made a decision to hold firm, because Taurus doesn't move without it feeling like a betrayal of something real. That's 4 steps over 7 days. Each one removed a layer of structural support from the old version of how you've been operating. Saturn set the truth. Chiron named the wound. Pluto locked the change. Taurus made it stable. The full moon tonight didn't begin anything. It inherited everything that week built. And it does one thing those 4 transits couldn't do individually. It turns a light on the entire structure at once, making the distance between who you've become and who you're still presenting to the world impossible to look away from. The question now is exactly what that opposition looks like, and why this particular configuration at 12 degrees Libra opposing 12 degrees Aries is the mechanism that makes looking away stop working. The opposition is exact at 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Moon at 12 degrees Libra, Sun and Saturn at 12 degrees Aries. The degree matters because it's the same degree on both sides, a direct, unambiguous mirror. There's no angular offset that allows one side to stay partially out of frame. Both are in full view simultaneously. In astrology, an opposition is exactly that, a mirror. One planet looks across the chart and sees the other at maximum distance and maximum clarity. What the Libra moon sees tonight when it looks across at Aries is the structure that week built, and it can't unsee it. Start with the moon in Libra. Libra's function is relational calibration, reading the room, adjusting tone, preserving connection, keeping things workable. It's the part of you that knows when to soften an edge and when to wait for a better moment. That intelligence is real, and it isn't weakness. But under a full moon, when the moon is at its most illuminated, its patterns most visible, Libra's default moves get exposed for what they are. The adjustment, the patience that has started to function as avoidance, the version of yourself you perform when someone else is in the room. Now, look at what it's reflecting back from Aries. Saturn in Aries gives the Aries side of this opposition something most Aries transits don't have: structure. Aries alone is an impulse, a direction, a forward motion. Saturn gives it form. The self that emerged from the week of March 25th isn't just wanting to be different. It has a shape, a decision with no remaining exit clause, a relational boundary that's been internally set, a version of what you want that Taurus has stabilized into a fixed position. That's not an impulse anymore. That's a structure. 2 structures, directly opposed, neither of them vague. Neptune is also in Aries right now, sitting in the same stellium as the Sun and Saturn. Neptune dissolves edges. It makes it possible to believe that 2 incompatible things could both be true if the framing is right, that maybe there's a version of the story where you don't actually have to choose. Saturn and Neptune in the same sign create a tension. Saturn insists on what's real. Neptune offers the comfort of the third option still being available. On most days, that tension is manageable. You can hold both. At 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that option closes, not because Neptune disappears, because when a full moon goes exact at the same degree as Saturn in opposition, Saturn's function, clarity, structure, reality without softening, is what's amplified. The full moon isn't illuminating Neptune's blur tonight, it's illuminating Saturn's form. And what comes into full light is the shape of what you've actually become, standing directly across from the role you've been maintaining. All day today, the opposition has been applying, meaning it's been tightening toward exact. The weight you've been carrying since this morning isn't abstract. It's the felt pressure of 2 defined states moving toward direct confrontation. Each hour that passes brings them closer to the same degree, the same axis, the same moment of full mutual visibility. At 10:11 p.m. that moment arrives. What it produces isn't a crisis, it isn't a decision, it's something simpler and harder than both, the complete simultaneous visibility of two paths, with no third option left in the room to look at instead. Here's what the mind reaches for when two options are that clear. A third one. Not consciously. Nobody sits down and decides to find a middle path. But there's a reflex, especially in the kind of person who has spent years managing the space between their own needs and what others expect. A reflex to find a framing that makes full commitment to either option unnecessary. Maybe it's not as clear-cut as it looks. Maybe there's a version of this where both things can still coexist if the conditions are right. Maybe waiting a little longer is a form of wisdom rather than avoidance. Libra, more than any other sign, is built for this reflex. Balance is Libra's actual function, holding opposing considerations in suspension, refusing to close before all the information is in. Under most conditions, that's not a flaw. It's a capacity. Tonight it runs directly into the sign it cannot negotiate with. Aries doesn't hold things in suspension. Aries moves. Saturn in Aries doesn't hold things in suspension and gives that movement a shape that doesn't bend back. When the full moon illuminates Libra at maximum brightness, when every Libra pattern is at full expression, what it's reflecting is a structure on the other side of the axis that has no flex in it. The new version of yourself that the week of March 25th built didn't leave room for a middle position. Saturn doesn't build structures with optional clauses. The third option isn't being withheld from you tonight. It's structurally absent. Here's the specific reason. By March 30th, when Venus moved into Taurus, the new desires and the new values stopped being a direction and became a position. A direction can be adjusted. A position in Taurus can't without that adjustment feeling like a betrayal of something real inside you. The old role and the new structure are not two preferences that could theoretically be blended. They are two formed, stable, incompatible states. They cannot share one space. Full moons don't create this kind of incompatibility. They illuminate what's already there. What you're feeling tonight isn't the moon making something happen. It's the moon removing the visual conditions that allowed you to look slightly to the side of what was already true. What this means practically is important. Tonight does not require action. The hook is precise about this. What tonight delivers is visibility, not a deadline. Both options are completely visible right now. That's a different thing from both options needing an answer right now. The choice becomes real and concrete tonight. The answer to that choice happens in specific conversations, specific boundaries, specific things you stop pretending are fine. And that part unfolds in the days ahead, not in the next few hours. But here's what changes permanently after tonight. The person who tries to return to the middle position after this full moon, to the state of still figuring it out, still holding both versions together, will meet resistance that wasn't there before. Not external resistance, internal. The structure that Saturn built on March 28th doesn't compress under social pressure. The stability that Taurus gave your new desires on March 30th doesn't dissolve because someone expects the old version. Every attempt to perform the old role from this point forward costs more than it did last week. The seams are showing. You'll feel them. That's not a warning. It's just the accurate description of where you are. Both paths are visible. Neither is hidden. What each of them actually leads to in the specific places of your life, that's what the next piece of this lands on. Both paths are real. Neither one is a failure. What they are is asymmetric. They don't lead to the same place, and they don't cost the same thing going forward. The first path is the new version of yourself made external. Not all at once. That's not how this works. It starts with one thing. One conversation that stops happening in the old register. One boundary that gets named out loud instead of managed quietly in your head. One arrangement that you stop pretending is working when it isn't. A single, specific action in a single, specific relationship. That's the whole of what the first step requires. not a complete reorganization of your life before the end of the week. One place where the inside and the outside come into alignment. Between now and April 9th, Venus forms a sextile to the North Node. The North Node marks the direction of development, not in a vague spiritual sense, but as a navigational point in the chart that indicates where movement has natural support behind it. Venus in Taurus sextile, the North Node means the new desires that stabilized on March 30th are already pointing in that direction. A step taken toward the first path in this window moves with the current, not because the conditions are magical, because the internal structure and the directional support are temporarily aligned, and that combination makes the first action easier to take and easier to hold. That window opens tonight after 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second path is a return to the old role. It's available. It's not a collapse or a catastrophe, but it carries a cost that wasn't there 2 weeks ago, and that cost is now physical rather than abstract. Every time you adjust what you say to match what someone expects from the old version of you, you'll feel the gap between what came out and what was actually there. That's not guilt. It's not judgment. It's the structural friction of performing a shape that no longer matches the interior. Taurus doesn't flex back easily. The new position in you is stable. Acting against it requires effort in a way that acting with it doesn't. That's the asymmetry. The first path has natural support behind it right now. The second path is possible, but runs against the grain of what Saturn already built. Mercury enters Aries in the days just after this full moon. Mercury governs how you put things into words, how you articulate a position, frame a boundary, open a direct conversation. Aries is the sign of straightforward speech without preamble. If you've been waiting for the right words to begin the first path, for a way to say what's true without having to construct it carefully, that's coming. The words that have felt slightly out of reach become more direct and more available. Not as a sudden revelation, as a natural shift in register that makes stating the new position feel less forced than it did last week. The first path doesn't ask you to have the full conversation tonight. It asks you to stop pretending the conversation isn't coming. The second path doesn't close permanently after this full moon. But every day that passes after the full moon without a step toward the first path, the old role costs a little more to wear, and the seams show to more people than just you. That brings you to what the full moon specifically surfaced tonight, not in general terms, but the three concrete things it put in the room, and what answering those things actually looks like in the days that follow. The full moon at 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time put three specific things in the room. Not concepts, not general areas of life. Three things you already know, because the week of March 25th named them, one by one, and the full moon tonight made it impossible to look at anything else. The first is a decision. The one the Saturn Cazimi clarified on March 25th. It may not be a decision that requires another person to agree with it or even know about it immediately, but it's the one where you stopped being undecided on the inside while maintaining the appearance of still considering it on the outside. The full moon put that gap in full light. The decision is made. The outside hasn't caught up. The second is a person, or a specific dynamic with a person. Venus Chiron on March 26th gave it a name. You know who it is. You know what the arrangement actually is versus what you've been calling it. The full moon didn't add new information about this. It removed the conditions that allowed that information to stay in the background. The third is a pattern. Something you've been doing, in how you respond, in what you agree to, in what you let pass without comment, that you've been treating as normal when it stopped being acceptable somewhere in the last several weeks. Not a dramatic rupture. A quiet, ongoing thing that the week just made impossible to keep classifying as fine. These three things don't require answers tonight. Tonight is the visibility. The answers happen in specific places, in specific exchanges, in the days that follow. One conversation. One boundary stated rather than managed silently. One thing you stop performing as though it still reflects who you are. The window between now and April 9th, while Venus is sextile the North Node, is the period where those answers have structural support. The direction and the desire and the internal structure are aligned. A step taken here toward the first path isn't a step taken against resistance. It's a step taken with what's already in motion. What makes this faster than expected isn't momentum or urgency. It's simpler. You stop spending energy on the maintenance of two incompatible states. That energy doesn't disappear, it redirects. The first real step doesn't feel heroic. It feels like putting down something heavy you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. After the moon goes exact tonight and begins to separate, pulling slowly away from the opposition, the acute pressure of full visibility eases. That's not the choice becoming less real. It's the choice moving from the zone of confrontation into the zone of consequence. What you do in the next 8 days is the answer to what tonight asked. The role you were playing before tonight is harder to put back on. Not impossible, but the seams are visible now in a way they weren't this morning. The choice isn't finished just because the moon is full. What got forced into the open still has to be answered in specific places. In one conversation, one boundary, one thing you stop pretending is fine. That part doesn't happen tonight. It happens in the days that follow, and it moves faster than you'd expect. Subscribe and stay close.